So these systems...
We're going to leave this discussion for a moment, take you live to the State Department for remarks by Secretary of State Mike Pompeo.
It is the assessment of the United States government that the Islamic Republic of Iran is responsible for the attacks that occurred in the Gulf of Oman today. This assessment is based on intelligence, the weapons used, the level of expertise needed to execute the operation, recent similar Iranian attacks on shipping, and the fact that no proxy group operating in the area has the resources and proficiency to act with such a high degree of sophistication. This is only the latest in a series of attacks instigated by the Islamic Republic of Iran and its surrogates against American and allied interests. And they should be understood in the context of 40 years of unprovoked aggression against freedom-loving nations. On April 22nd, Iran promised the world that it would interrupt the flow of oil through the Strait of Hormuz. It is now working to execute on that promise. In early May, the Revolutionary Guard Corps attempted the covert deployment of modified dhows capable of launching missiles. On May 12th, Iran attacked 4 commercial ships near the Strait of Hormuz. On May 14th, Iran-backed surrogates attacked by armed drones struck 2 strategically important oil pipelines in Saudi Arabia. On May 19th, a rocket landed near the U.S. Embassy in Baghdad. On May 31st, a car bomb in Afghanistan wounded 4 U.S. service members, killed 4 Afghan civilians, and wounded bystanders. Yesterday, Iranian surrogates fired a missile into Saudi Arabia, striking the arrivals terminal of an international airport, injuring 26 people. Taken as a whole, these unprovoked attacks present a clear threat to international peace and security, a blatant assault on the freedom of navigation, and an unacceptable campaign of escalating tension by Iran. Prime Minister Abe made a historic trip to Iran to ask the regime to de-escalate and enter into talks. Iran's supreme leader rejected Prime Minister Abe's diplomacy today by saying he has no response to President Trump and will not answer. The supreme leader's government then insulted Japan by attacking a Japanese oil tanker just outside of Iranian waters, threatening the lives of the entire crew, creating a maritime emergency. Iran's foreign minister today responded to these attacks. He said sardonically, quote, "Suspicious doesn't begin to describe what likely transpired this morning," end of quote. Foreign Minister Zarif may think this is funny, but no one else in the world does. Iran is lashing out because the regime wants our successful maximum pressure campaign lifted. No economic sanctions entitle the Islamic Republic to attack innocent civilians, disrupt global oil markets, and engage in nuclear blackmail. The international community condemns Iran's assault on the freedom of navigation and the targeting of innocent civilians. Today, I've instructed our UN Ambassador Jonathan Cohen to raise Iran's attacks in the UN Security Council meeting later this afternoon. Our policy remains an economic and diplomatic effort to bring Iran back to the negotiating table at the right time, to encourage a comprehensive deal that addresses the broad range of threats. Threats today apparent for all the world to see, to peace and security. Iran should meet diplomacy with diplomacy, not with terror, bloodshed, and extortion. The United States will defend its forces, interests, and stand with our partners and allies to safeguard global commerce and regional stability. And we call upon all nations threatened by Iran's provocative acts to join us in that endeavor. Thank you.
Secretary of State Pompeo.
Remarks by Secretary of State Mike Pompeo on the attack of 2 oil tankers in the Persian Gulf. The Secretary speaking at the State Department in Washington, D.C. We take you back now to the Hudson Institute.
Moments ago and blaming Iran for attacks on tankers in the Gulf of Oman.
It is the assessment of the United States government that the Islamic Republic of Iran is responsible for the attacks that occurred in the Gulf of Oman today. This assessment is based on intelligence, the weapons used, the level of expertise needed to execute the operation, recent similar Iranian attacks on shipping, and the fact that no proxy group operating in the area has the resources and proficiency to act with such a high degree of sophistication.
Well, defense sources tell CNN a U.S. Navy ship spotted an unexploded mine attached to one of the two tankers attacked this morning. One of those tankers was carrying oil, the other chemicals. Now, these images show black smoke, as you can see right here, billowing from one of the tankers after it was hit by what the owner calls some kind of shell. Now, this all happened as the tankers were sailing through the Gulf of Oman. That's a busy and strategic shipping lane in the Middle East. Officials are drawing comparisons to attacks on 4 ships in the same area a month ago. So there is a lot to discuss here. I want to bring in CNN senior diplomatic correspondent Michelle Kaczynski, CNN military analyst Lieutenant General Mark Hertling, and retired Rear Admiral John Kirby. He's a former spokesman for both the State Department and the Pentagon. First to you, Michelle, you were at Pompeo's news conference. What does this attack mean for the U.S.?
Well, it shows that the U.S. stance of deterrence and increased pressure on Iran is affecting Iran. The U.S. was so quick to call Iran out as the culprit for this one. It took a long time in the attacks on May 12th. There were very similar attacks, similar MO. It was tankers that were also affected. But today, day of, the U.S. is willing to come out and say Iran was behind this. And you heard the Secretary spell it out there. So it shows that this is affecting Iran. And they are feeling the pinch of its IRGC, its Revolutionary Guard, being designated a terrorist attack, of the U.S. convincing companies not to do business with Iran and cutting off some of its oil shipments out. We know through multiple sources that Iran is feeling that. They're obviously furious about it, and this is one more way of showing it, but it's not deterring them, clearly. And the U.S. stance is having an effect, but it's not changing Iran's behavior, at least not right now. So now comes the scenario of how do you respond to this? After the attacks on the 12th that we mentioned, U.S. allies were saying, remember, European allies want to keep the Iran nuclear deal, and they want to keep doing business with Iran because they feel like that's the best pathway to ultimately changing Iran's behavior. So when they saw that Iran attacked these tankers, they felt like, oh God, now we have to respond to this, and that has to come through the UN. Unpleasant for them because it shakes up the status quo, but they felt like that would have to be something that needed to be done after something so serious. And now we have another round of this same kind of attack. So we'll see what the international community does because of this.
And the UN Security Council, I believe, will be meeting within the next hour to discuss these attacks. So the question is also, will the U.S. do anything else? Admiral Kirby, we know that the U.S. has already announced sending 1,500 additional troops to the Middle East in response to Iran's actions previous to the attacks on the tankers. Now, Barbara Starr reporting the Navy is going to be sending in more Navy ships to the region. Yeah. I was just speaking to a national security official yesterday, though, who said there is always this concern with Iran that there will be a miscalculation. Do you think with these added moves that increases the risk of a miscalculation with Iran?
No, Pam, I think it reduces the risk of miscalculation, and I suspect that's why the Navy is going to send additional resources in terms of ships and maybe even aircraft to that part of the Gulf of Oman to try to send a strong message to Iran that we do have a presence there, that they shouldn't escalate things any further. So I think it really is an attempt to de-escalate the tensions and to try to reduce the risk of miscalculation. That said, the Iranian Revolutionary Guard is a bit of a proxy group inside Iran. They don't necessarily answer directly to the civil state authorities. So they act oftentimes unilaterally and sometimes not even in concert or coordination with the government in Tehran. So there's still always going to be a risk that they could take more matters into their own hands and cause more damage.
So, General Hertling, I want to bring you in for your perspective because Secretary of State Mike Pompeo, he came out quickly on this, condemning Iran, blaming Iran. He said that only Iran has the sophisticated technology to pull off something like this. Do you agree with that?
I don't, first of all. What I would say, though, too, this is a potential approach to using asymmetric warfare. What I mean by that, Pamela, is they are using a weak force to attack a strong power, us. And they're doing it by using really inexpensive devices, limpet mines, placed on ships that are coming out of our partners or allies' ports. These 2 ships that came out, and Admiral Kirby can speak to this, came out of a port in Saudi Arabia, Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates. These are two of our allies, our partners. So they are attacking our friends, and one of those ships was going to Japan while Prime Minister Abe was in Iran at the time. They are using very cheap devices, if you will, to conduct a warfare against us. And putting more ships in the area can certainly feel good, but you're talking about a technologically advanced Navy going into an area to fight against these kinds of things that are easily placed on ships. It doesn't take much to do this. Secretary Pompeo also mentioned the rocket attack in Baghdad. Having been in Baghdad and know what kind of rockets Iranian proxy forces send into the city, they're not technologically advanced. Sometimes they're fired off the back of mules. So these are not things that are expensive, and the maximum pressure campaign that we are attempting to use against Iran, they're doing against us by attacking our allies and our partners.
And this is all happening as tensions continue to escalate between Iran and the U.S. Michelle Kaczynski, Admiral John Kirby, and Lieutenant General Mark Hertling, thank you very much.